You ready?
Let's get it.
All
Let's
right.
get it.
Hey, PBC Podcast fam, it's Charles James. I am here with Caroline Fenton. Caroline, would you like to say anything? Like a little, like,
Hi. Happy to be here. Super, super excited. Always enjoy connecting with, anyone getting into the business, but especially an LSU student and soon to be LSU grad.
yeah, really excited. So today I want to start off by asking, like, how would you describe your brand slash persona to someone who you were just meeting for the first time?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think the best answer I could say is still evolving. And I think whenever you're a broadcaster, really, and anything that you do in any sort of business, in any sort of profession, who you are, how you handle things, how you carry yourself, that's always changing because you're meeting new people that might inspire you. You have new experiences that might shape you in one certain way. But I think now, kind of where I am, my personal brand and maybe my kind of vibe and voice as a broadcaster, I feel like I can bring a couple different things to the table as a radio host and as an analyst in sports media. There's not enough women. There are not enough women. So I always try and bring that kind of feminine side and feminine and playful, but also while being like fierce at the same time. I'm someone that's not afraid to shy away from a debate. I'm not afraid to have some difficult conversations. I'm not afraid to kind of push back. So I would say I'm someone that like very much so embraces debate. And that's something that I grew confidence in over time through some more experiences, just getting more reps on the radio and working with different co-hosts that have kind of shaped me in that certain way. So there's a lot of different words that I think that I could use. I like to be fun. I like to be playful. I'm sarcastic and clever, but I'm also serious when I know when to be. And I think that's also another valuable thing as a broadcaster, as really just a professional in general, is what kind of side of your personality and your personal brand do you bring to the table? For example, I was on Sirius XM SEC radio this morning. And so that is a league owned network and it's a hyper specific network. We talk about the SEC. So I can be a little bit more laid back. I can be a little bit more casual. We probably won't get into as many hot button issues just since it is a league owned network. But whenever I'm on Sirius XM Mad Dog Radio, that's Chris Russo. So it's loud, it's bold, it's hot takes, it's a lot more debate. So I can bring at least a little bit of a different side of my personal brand and personal persona. So I would say in a nutshell, feminine, fun, and fierce.
Yeah. Speaking of there not being enough women in the industry, I do want to highlight one of your amazing accomplishments of being the first co-host for 102.5 The Game.
Thank
How did
you.
it feel to be like that first one to break down that barrier and really be that trailblazer?
It was an amazing feeling. It was a feeling of immense pride because I knew getting into sports media that there weren't enough women. And I knew, especially in radio, it's not typically a medium that women tend to gravitate toward. It is a lot of old white men in the radio industry. And it's getting better day over day, year over year. It's getting better. So I was very honored that I could at least break down that first wall. I was very honored that I got to be the first female voice that, I remember growing up as a kid when my dad would drop me off at school, my dad would listen to sports talk radio, dropping me off in the morning. So I was thinking of, young girls that are doing the same things, driving around with their parents or with their older siblings. They hear my voice, they know what's possible. Because I know I never really thought that a career in sports was tangible or possible until I saw Aaron Andrews doing sideline reporting, when I saw Maria Taylor on College Game Day. So whenever I saw someone who looked like me doing that, I thought, okay, I can do that. So it was very much so an honor, and it's something that I'm still very proud of to this day. It was also difficult. It's hard being the first to do anything. It's hard whenever the voices that you become so accustomed to hearing all of a sudden change and the perspectives are a little bit different. So there was some challenges that I had to overcome. A lot of people who didn't think that I belonged there, that didn't think that I was qualified to be in the position that I was in. A lot of people that, even if I was the most prepared person on the show, even if every point I was making was spot on and totally correct and totally accurate, there were still people who would doubt me, and there were still people who would question me a little bit more than they would question maybe a male counterpart. So those were challenges that made me better. It made me learn. It thickened my skin a lot. So with that honor came some difficulties, but I became a better person, a better broadcaster, and I think a better advocate for women in this medium because of it.
Do want to ask you a little bit about those challenges because
Mhm.
I've always personally been a big believer in the fact that by learning other people's stories and learning how they overcome them and how learning how they navigate those situations, you can apply that to your life and kind of, in a sense, live through the person so that you don't have to kind of live through it yourself in a way. So, was there any like really odd or kind of extravagant situation that kind of like stemmed from you being a woman in the sports media field?
Mhm.
And like, how did you navigate that?
There's unfortunately a lot of examples that I have come across, whether it's sexual harassment or just like verbal harassment. It's a boys club, and so there might be certain things that are said that maybe someone has zero ill will in saying, but just me as a woman, I'm like, well, I really would have appreciated it, like if you didn't say that. Like it makes me feel singled out. I think the biggest thing that I've experienced, and I don't have a specific example, but it's social media. It's people that will, comment on the things that I say and say, well, what do you expect? She's a woman. Or she has no business speaking on football. Women don't play football. Women have no place in this game. I get it all the time of, oh, she's probably just regurgitating things that her husband tells her to say. I'm not married. I don't have a husband. Or she's just regurgitating things that other people might say. And those things, hearing those things are so frustrating because they're so belittling that to those people, I couldn't be someone that does my own research, that forms my own opinions. I'm a person that has worked very hard to be in the positions that I'm in, yet I'm constantly belittled because people believe, oh, there's no way she could have done this on her own. I think another example of that, of being a young woman in this field, is there is an assumption that you have ulterior motives being in this position of she's just here to sleep with athletes, she's slept her way to the top, this like this sense of like, oh, she's only here because she slept her way to get where she is to be. And that is another just so disrespectful and demeaning way to, to just assume something of someone. And the assumption isn't, oh, she must be talented and work very hard and earned her way there. It always is an ulterior thing. So that's always hard. It's always difficult to hear. I early in my career, though, I reached out to a mentor of mine who is a woman in sports media, is someone that has received a lot of um, pushback on social media. She might not be the most popular person out there. So I asked her, like, look, and I love her. I love her to death, but I understand you have divisive figures in sports and media in general. I asked her, how do you deal with this? Because early on in my career in Nashville, I was 23 years old. It was my first radio job. I was still navigating what the role was while also navigating being a public figure, so to speak, and navigating my learning curve being broadcast to hundreds of thousands of people every single day. It was overwhelming. So I reached out to her and I asked, like, how do you deal with this? Because I honestly don't know if I can do it anymore. And she said, make a list of people whose opinions you care about. That's your mentors, that's your co-hosts, that's your bosses. Those are the people that genuinely care about your success, who genuinely want to see you thrive and genuinely believe in you and your abilities. Anyone who's not on that list, they're not allowed to make you feel a certain way because their opinions do not matter. So this, idiot that's commenting on YouTube, or someone that's tweeting at you saying that you are too fat or too skinny or too ugly or too pretty or too dumb or too smart, whatever it is. As a woman, you're always too something. Whatever it is, they don't matter because their opinion doesn't matter. They don't care about your success. They don't care genuinely about you as a person and as a professional. So that's something that I still practice every single day. And I wish that I could say that the things that people say about me don't bother me. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's like, okay, whatever, like, whatever. Some days are easier than others. So it's something that you always have to practice. And it's something that I always remind myself of. If I let these, small people get me down, then they win. If I let them push me out of this business, then they win. Then how can I be the next first woman that does something else? Or how can I be the next woman that takes over this job? How am I making this world, this industry easier for other women that are coming behind me? if I leave it. So that's it's just always trying to practice believing in yourself, having that confidence in yourself, always going back to the people that care about you and want to see you thrive, and never letting those voices truly get to you. Don't let them win.
Especially the idea of making the whole list. I kind of want to ask, like,
Yeah.
how do you go about deciding who belongs on that list and
Mm-hmm.
making sure that the wrong people don't kind of like maneuver their way onto your list?
It's a great question. And that's something that I think also is ever evolving. For me, when I was at LSU, my list was probably pretty short. It was Chad Sabity and my professors at the Manship School, and it was Steve Schneider at WAFB, and it was Michael Cobble at WBRZ, people who I had in my corner, people who I felt comfortable going to for questions and for critiques. Now that list has grown because my career has evolved and I've met more people and I have more people in my corner. I think probably the best advice that I would have for finding those people that are truly in your corner is, who do you trust to, let's just say you put your heart and soul into a podcast, into a package, into an article, into a blog, whatever it might be, and you want some feedback. Who's the first person that you think of that you feel like would give you that genuine feedback? Wouldn't tear it apart, wouldn't tear you down, would give you constructive criticism. It would help you build forward, and doing it in a genuine way. And who is that person that's going to give you constructive criticism? Like, who's going to give you some tough love? That's important too. As I talk about, outside criticism, that's all outside. Constructive criticism is imperative in this business, of taking notes, of learning from other people, of having them listen to you or read your writing or watch what you put together. Having that constructive criticism is so, so important, because we live in a very subjective business, that there might be something that you love that somebody might not love, but just because it's artistic opinion doesn't mean it's wrong. But sometimes in this business, in radio and television, you have X, Y's, and Z's and ABCs and check marks that you need to check and boxes that you need to check. So having a different set of eyes, a more experienced set of eyes, that's really important. And that is how you grow as a broadcaster, as an individual, as a professional. So who do you trust to do that? Who would you trust to show your work to know that it's going to be taken care of, to know that they're going to take care of you? And look, sometimes those people will be on your list as you go throughout your career. Maybe that person's taken off your list. And I would hate that if there's someone that you no longer trust anymore, but that's the reality, unfortunately. So always kind of practicing those people in your corner, and always staying connected to those people in your corner, and always going back to who has my best interest in mind.
Wanted to speak to that one point you made about constructive criticism and actually finding people who are willing to speak from different perspectives. And I kind of wanted to expand that more so to the entire field as a whole, because I wanted to ask, how do you feel that like the diversity of opinions and the actual like presence of clashing opinions has actually grown or diminished in the past 5 years?
I think clashing opinions is a good thing. And of course, that comes with limits. It's one thing, we're not going to discuss hot button political issues. Like, we're not going to talking about clashing of opinions for abortion and immigration. That's not what I'm talking about. And I'm not talking about, just dealing with people that you have a difference of opinion with, and you dislike that person. That's one thing. But clashing of opinions on air, like a first take, for example, or on a radio show, that's what drives discussion. And that comes with the caveat of disagreeing respectfully, having a different opinion from someone, and still respecting that person and their opinion, even if it differs from them. But it's good to disagree. It's good to debate. It's good to go back and forth with certain arguments. That's the wonderful thing about sports, is because nobody's right and nobody is wrong. Like, I know one hot button issue right now in the NFL is the quarterback carousel. Well, you might think that Sam Darnold is the best option for the Minnesota Vikings moving forward. I might not. Neither of us are right and neither of us are wrong, but we can go back and forth for 15, 20 minutes about our opinion and why we think what is right and what isn't right. We should embrace debate. That's another thing, as kind of a woman in this industry, is there are few very few spaces for women to have opinions in this industry. So if you can find that, I think that's a very wonderful thing. And I'm speaking on my perspective as a woman. You might have a different perspective as a Black man, wherever you feel like your opinions are celebrated and where your opinions are heard. But always find that place where you can do that. But debate is absolutely a good thing as long as you know that underlying sense of respect is still there. I've done that so many times on radio shows with co-hosts of mine. We'll go back and forth for like an entire segment, an entire hour, whatever it might be. And we are just going at each other on air. And then we go to break and then we're talking about, okay, like, what are you doing today? What are your weekend plans? How's this going? How's the wife? How's the kids? So, being able to turn that on and off and always understanding that it's never personal. And if it becomes personal, that's when when you can kind of step away and have a conversation as adults and kind of get back to the groundwork and to the framework.
I definitely feel that there always needs to be a separation between, and we've talked about this in Professor Saturday's class, like how there has to be kind of a separation between your sports self and then your actual self.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't really let either one be too dominant over each other, especially when it gets into conversations of sports, because people can get very heated.
Yeah.
Like they can get very animated, especially about the teams. Like I know anyone who's ever come at my Ravens, I've come at them vehemently and unendingly because that will always be my team. I will never let anyone slander them. But at the same time, like I always find myself making sure that I separate between the fact that they're attacking my team versus it being an actual like war between me and them. It's just a
Mm-hmm.
difference of opinion. It's really at the end of the day, it's a conversation, not an argument. And that's
Totally.
always something that I'm trying to keep cognizant of for real. Now, I also did want to ask you, you spoke
Mm-hmm.
about like trying to find your space, your area where you can properly properly express your opinion and kind of speak towards what you care about and what matters to you in a way that is well received. How
Mm-hmm.
would you say people should go about finding that for themselves?
Yeah, that's a great question. To go back to the point you just made, you always have to separate your fandom from your professional life. But I also think that there's a space for that. That, like, let's say if you are on a podcast and someone's coming at your Ravens and saying, Lamar Jackson will never win a Super Bowl. Let's just say that. Like, you might feel like I can see it in your face. You're getting heated. You're getting angry. It's okay to let that shine through because you have a perspective as a Ravens fan that I might not as a New Orleans Saints fan. It was the same thing last year with the Heisman debate, Jaden Daniels and Bo Nix and Michael Penix Jr. I was definitely flexing my LSU muscle a little bit and campaigning for Jaden Daniels while bringing stats to the table and being objective, but also having that background of I'm an LSU fan. I watch every LSU game. I tune into podcasts. I talk about the team more than anyone else does in Nashville. So it's finding that balance of you never let your fandom seep over into your professional life, but you can also use it a little bit to your advantage. But your question about finding that space where you kind of feel respected and celebrated. Sometimes you fall into spaces that you're not. And sometimes you go through an interview process and you love everyone that you meet and the job just feels right. And then when you're in it, you realize like I don't feel like I'm being heard. I don't feel like my creative ideas are being listened to and really are being celebrated. I don't feel encouraged here. That's your sign to step away from that job. And I think when I was, in your shoes and I was at LSU, like just the idea of getting a job was so coveted. I just wanted to work in this industry. And sometimes you have to take that first job that comes your way, but it's also okay to step away. I stepped away from a job at ESPN that I loved. And I thought I was crazy for doing that because if you would have told 18, 19, 20-year-old me that I would have gotten a job in Bristol, Connecticut at the mecca of sports and, the greatest network of in sports television history, that a year and a half, 2 years later, I would have stepped away from that voluntarily. I would have thought that I was crazy. It just didn't fit me or my passions or my goals anymore. And I wanted to find more. I wanted to explore more for myself. So how do you find that? It's being picky in the interviews process. It's coming prepared with questions that you can kind of see someone's real character because just like you bring your best self into an interview, hiring manager is going to bring their best selves into an interview. So asking those real, raw, and emotional questions like, hey, I noticed that there's no other women in this newsroom. There's no other people of color in this newsroom. Is there a reason for that? Is my presence going to be celebrated, or is my presence going to be a distraction? Like asking those questions, I think are fair because we're talking about your career, your livelihood, your life, your happiness. You can ask those questions, but also, if you have a job and you just don't feel celebrated anymore, have those questions and also feel free to step away. That was one reason why I made the jump from ESPN to the Nashville sports talk radio area, was because they were very upfront and honest about how I was the first female co-host and the first female voice on the radio station. They gave me kind of a few pointers and a few little tidbits of how they were going to support me in that. They prepared me for what was to come. And I felt like, okay, this is a very safe space for me to learn and to grow. And then ultimately it was time for me to step away from that because I could grow a little bit more on the national stage. So the interview process is paramount. Talk to the people that work there, not just the hiring managers, but talk to the secretaries, talk to the custodians, talk to the people that are in areas, in teams that you're not going to work with, but you'll probably pass and eat lunch with on a daily basis. Just really try and get an idea for the corporate culture, and then you can go from there.
Really do feel like it's kind of a lost art and kind of a lost perspective that not only is the company trying to convince you to join them, but you're trying to show, yes, I am trying to be part of this company, but why should this company really deserve me in a sense?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what does it give to me back? Like, beyond just having a job, like, what is the atmosphere like? How is it going to make me grow? How is it going to advance me as a person? How is it going to advance my career? And that's always how, especially my parents have always introduced to me that, like, whenever I'm in an interview, it's not like I'm showing why they should want me, but at the same time, I'm trying to make them see that they have to earn me in a
Mm-hmm.
sense. And I feel like it's kind of hard to kind of keep track of that, especially because like do you ever feel like there's kind of a power dynamic in like the interview setup? Just
Mm-hmm.
how like as you walk in, it almost feels like you have to like gain the control in the interview, like in the first couple like questions to like kind of like build that dynamic where it's like not only am I here for a job, but I am here to see if you truly fit my like
Mm-hmm.
in a sense.
Totally. Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I think where I started to feel a lot more comfortable in interviews, especially coming out of college, because that feeling of you have to earn me too. Sometimes you just have to put your foot in the door. Sometimes you just have to get your foot in the door and take a job that maybe you're not obsessed with, but that is going to help you grow. Maybe it's not your dream job, but you're like, okay, it's an opportunity. I'm getting paid. I can learn. I can build mentors. Like sometimes you just have to get your foot in the door. And that sense of you have to earn me grows so much more throughout your career that it is a lot more reciprocal. But one thing that really helped me in interviews was this is an opportunity for me to show you how cool I am. Like I get to talk about myself and the things that I've done, things that I've learned, and the things that I've grown. Like I get to show myself off. And if your perspective of interviews is, oh my gosh, I like they have to like me. I have to, it starts to get really like anxiety. They get a lot of anxiety if I really hope they like me. I hope they like me. No, this is your chance to show yourself off. You should be proud of yourself and what you have done. This is your opportunity to show that off to someone who can give you an opportunity as well. But just as much as they're evaluating you and your fit, you have to make sure that they're a fit in your life as well. Because you don't always have to take a job just because it's a job. If you get bad vibes and you have people that may have worked there in the past and they've said that, look, you can't negotiate for a higher salary and it's very competitive and the people that work there aren't very nice and whatever it might be, you don't have to take that job just because it's a job. Not every opportunity is the right opportunity.
So I did want to get into a little bit of deeper topic right quick.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, so with the social climate of DEI right now, a
Mm-hmm.
lot of companies have been rolling back their DEI programs, and it's been kind of a crazy time for people. I wanted to ask, how do you believe that's going to affect sports and media? And do you believe there's any projected issues that may arise from it?
It's a hard topic because it is such a politically motivated topic, and it unfortunately the idea of diversity, which is something that should be celebrated and should be embraced, has now become like a bad word, and I will never understand that I think you need diversity. You need the difference of opinions. You need someone that comes from a different background or a different perspective. I always use this example, and this isn't something that I personally worked on, but it really stuck out to me. So, Tyrann Mathieu, obviously, his nickname's the landlord. I don't know why, like, I don't know where that came from, but his nickname in Kansas City when he was with the Chiefs was the landlord. And there was a photo of Tyrann Mathieu and the rest of the Kansas City Chiefs secondary like walking out of the tunnel. And the caption was something like, "The landlord comes knocking for rent money. What are you gonna do?" And it was kind of like these intimidating guys like walking out, like yeah, like a tough thing. And it's like, how do you react to this? And all of the comments were like, this is like really out of touch. This is really tone deaf. And I didn't have that perspective because I didn't know what that meant. Like I didn't know that to some communities and to some groups of people that have experienced those things and maybe had a different background than I had, saw that as very tone deaf. That's why we need people that look different and come from different backgrounds all in the room and making these discussions. So you can avoid something like that. So you can avoid looking tone deaf or silly or rude or offensive or whatever it might be. So, how does that affect sports media? Frankly, I'm not quite sure. How will that look in 5 to 10, 15, 20 years? I don't know. And I think that can kind of fuel you when you look at through your job search if there is a company that's maybe not embracing that kind of diversity. They don't need to flat out say, hey, we don't support or we do support DEI. You'll feel it. Like you will feel it as somebody that maybe is underrepresented or as a minority. You'll feel that. So I hope it doesn't affect sports media, frankly. I think that there are a lot of voices that are people of color, women, LGBTQ members, whatever it might be, members of that community that deserve to be here, whether they are a minority or not, like whether it's DEI or not. You are talented and you have earned it and you deserve to be in this space. I hope that that's where the world goes. But frankly, I don't know. We're living in kind of an unsure time right now in the world, and sports are a reflection of culture, a reflection of politics. That's life, that's culture. So in sports media, I hope that things don't change and that there continues to be a positive trend to sports media looking more like the world that we live in, and rather than just a cookie cutter same person copy and pasted throughout different sports media outlets, because we need those voices.
Would you say that you've seen it more so trend away from that cookie cutter experience, or would you say that we're still in that breaking out phase where it's, yes, we're pushing to it, but we haven't, but we're still like have more steps to reach? Or do you feel like we're like already kind of breaking out of it and like kind of on that path to just making it more expansive and more prevalent?
I think both. If that's an okay answer, like I think that we've made so much progress. The fact that I am here talking to you about a career in sports, that's not something that could have been realistic maybe 20, 30, 40, especially 50 years ago. I have a mentor of mine in Nashville. She was one of the original writers that covered the Tennessee Titans since they came to Nashville in 1997. I can't imagine what the world was like being a young woman covering a football team in 1997. Fast forward to now, it's commonplace. You see women everywhere covering hockey, football, basketball, whatever it might be. Women that have opinions, women that are very smart, that have great connections and great relationships and can break news. So, yes, we are moving toward a much better space. But I still think that we have work to do. I still think that there's a lot of social discussion surrounding like my experience of, you don't belong here. It's like, okay, I do, but like, okay. I hope that 15, 20, less than that years from now, that won't be a thing, that a woman with an opinion and a voice just becomes the norm rather than a reason for you to roll your eyes and an assumption that I don't know what I'm talking about. And I think it's the same thing for any kind of marginalized group or any sort of minority group in sports media in the world in general. we can always do better. We can always have more voices. And the social commentary is really kind of the biggest thing. You're always going to have the peanut gallery. You're always going to have people that have their opinions. But the more and more it just becomes commonplace year over year and generation over generation, it stops becoming taboo and it just becomes normal.
Solution of conversation is always good thing with this. Like a- as the years go by, everything that seemed so scary to talk about as people become, I feel like it's also as people just learn to actually see the other sides and actually hear those different opinions,
Mm-hmm.
like it becomes less scary because people are much more afraid of the unknown than what they can hear about and what they can learn from other people to actually understand. And as we kind of pull all those different views together, it just starts to make sense in a way.
Right.
And like you kind of see all the sides and you actually understand all the sides to an extent.
Totally. And I use just from my personal experience when it came out that Deshaun Watson, he had 27 women come forward for charges of sexual assault, sexual harassment, so on and so forth. I took the lead on that discussion on my radio show at the time because I'm a woman and I can, uh, thank goodness I cannot speak to something that personally happened to me like that, but it kind of felt just natural that my voice was the first one that you heard about a football player essentially being a sexual predator against women. Having my voice and my perspective as a woman leading that conversation, I at least hope brought a different perspective to my co-hosts or people that are listening. It's the same thing for any kind of topic or any kind of discussion. I'm sure the social commentary and the way that we would talk about Colin Kaepernick kneeling for the national anthem would be a little bit different now than maybe it was at the time because we're having more of these conversations. We can feel more comfortable to have these conversations that might feel a little uncomfortable, might feel a little bit awkward, but understanding that, hey, we're just all trying to learn. We're all trying to be better. The fact that we're even talking about this right now, we're talking about DEI and the future of sports, I think that that is a sign of good things to come. We just have to continue to have those conversations.
I feel like as the conversation progresses, always I'm a firm believer that it's going to get better and it's going to keep progressing to the point that we need it to be. Really just gotta keep having them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, with all the topics we've kind of talked about, I kind of wanted to see if there was a way that we could like consolidate them for people coming into the field and like give them kind of like almost like a step by step for like how they should like try and get into the field and kind of make themselves prominent, kind of like build their brand, figure out
Mm-hmm.
their career, figure out what they want to do. So if we could make a step by step plan, what do you
Yeah.
think would we put in it?
Yeah. I always say work hard, be nice to people, and don't take any shit. That you be your best advocate. The only person that you can guarantee is going to stand up for yourself is you. So if there's something that you feel like you're not getting that you deserve, you should feel the right to stand up for yourself and vouch for yourself. Work hard, work your butt off. Take every opportunity that you can get, even if it's an opportunity that doesn't sound fabulous or gorgeous or amazing. If it's an opportunity that doesn't sound like your dream job, try it. Like, try it out, get the expertise, get the experience, put your head down and work. Just do your homework, go the extra mile, work really hard. That's how you set yourself apart in this business. Everyone wants to do these jobs, but it's the people that work the hardest that will ultimately kind of set themselves apart. And be nice to people. Like, be kind, be a genuinely good person to be around. Create connections and maintain those connections and reach out to people when they have a baby or on Christmas Day. Always maintain those connections. I can even say for myself, like I've gotten shifts on Sirius XM because producers like to work with me. And that is something that I'm very proud of. That if they enjoy working with me, that means I'm doing something right. I was, always had a good relationship with all of my ex coworkers from ESPN. That's ultimately what got me an opportunity doing national sports talk at Yahoo Sports. So always be nice to people. Of course, you're going to be nice to the higher ups, but be nice to the people that might be below you on the organizational chart or might be people that you don't necessarily view as the people that can get your foot in the door. You never know who those people might end up becoming and how those people like trust those people for kind of a vouching of your character. So if you're trying to get into this business, always, always, always keep those things in mind. Connections will get you through the door. What you do and how you treat people and how hard you work will keep you there. And in terms of building your brand, because that's the B word, I call it, I think can be kind of intimidating because it's a very vague word. Your brand, like, okay, is that personal brand? Is that social media brand, online brand? Is that your brand on a broadcast? Don't be intimidated by the word. Essentially, it's just like, who are you? What's your elevator pitch? How would someone elevator pitch for you? When you're first getting into it, ask yourself just a couple of these questions. First of all, who am I? Like who am I genuinely as a person? What's my personality? What are my interests? How would my friends describe me? Who am I? Kind of a scary question. Harder than it needs to be, but just trying to figure out, okay, who am I? Figure out, who do I want to become? Who do I admire? Who is someone in the business that I ultimately want to be one day? For me, it was a radio host named Maggie Gray in New York City. It was Maria Taylor, who was on ESPN at the time, who's now on NBC. It was Laura Rutledge on ESPN. It was all of these people, these women that were doing things that I wanted to be. So I would kind of observe what they were doing. What was their path? What's their kind of diction when they deliver a piece of news? I kind of modeled myself early on after them. To then I got to a point where I was like, okay, now I'm comfortable being myself. I needed them to kind of fake it till I made it. And I needed them to kind of mold who I was early on to give myself that sense of confidence early on. And then it just was a very seamless transition into less of them and more of me and figuring out my own style. So early on, who are you? Who do you want to become? And then that'll all kind of blossom into who you will ultimately be as a professional and as a broadcaster throughout reps and throughout time and throughout more opportunities.
I wanted to go a little bit deeper into that less of them, more of me, hey, like aspect or phase of it.
Mm-hmm.
So once you kind of take in a lot of their aspects and kind of like use it to help mold yourself as you're getting into the industry, did you receive any like pushback as you were trying to bring more of yourself into it and like take less of them from it? Or would you say that it was more so kind of like just a transformation where they kind of just were just like really surprised by it, but they like, yeah.
I think, yeah, it's a good question. And I think it's a little bit more seamless than that, that there's maybe not as much of like a flip that switches that all of a sudden I show up one day and I'm a new person. Like it's a little bit more seamless than that. And it was something that I didn't even actively try to do. It's just something that happens naturally when you gain that natural confidence in yourself and you get comfortable in front of the mic, you get comfortable in, with the producers that you're working with, or, in my case, when I was working in Nashville, I was more comfortable with the market that I was in. So I think it just happens more and more naturally. You just have to let yourself get there. You have to let yourself try new things and learn what works and then learn what like absolutely doesn't. I did that plenty of times where I tried to go outside of my comfort zone and try something different, be a little bit more creative. And it was like, yep, let's never do that again. And it's like, okay, awesome, cool, message received. And then I tried some new things and it was really good and it worked. And then I was like, okay, how do we make that better? And how do we continue to incorporate that in more and more of our shows? And then it stops becoming something that you really have to actively think about and it starts becoming second nature. And that happens over and over and over and over again in your career. At least for me as a broadcaster, you're not always in a position of, okay, I'm growing and now I'm here, and then I'm growing again and now I'm here. There's different aspects where I feel like I'm in a really good place in one area, or I can push myself in another area, whether it's my knowledge of a certain game or historical context or thinking outside the box with topics. You're always evolving and it's kind of a fluid thing. You always have to push yourself to try and break out of that box and be okay when it doesn't work. It's not the end of the world. Just don't make the same mistake twice.
So as we transfer into the last leg of this interview, I kind of want to get a little bit more into like how the college landscape of sports has been looking.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask, How do you feel it's changed over the past couple of years?
Well, I mean, how hasn't it changed? Everything's different. Like it looks completely different. Um, the NIL aspect of it all, I think, has been the biggest change for so many reasons. You're looking at it from the football side, obviously, players are going to different schools for different reasons. That we're seeing so much more movement in college sports than we have ever seen before. We're seeing stacked teams like Ohio State investing however many millions of dollars that they did in this team to really go for it. Like that's not something that we've seen in college sports before. It's like building your own super team. We only see that in professional sports. So that is an added challenge that there is so much more movement now that in the off seasons I'm like, wait, oh, that guy's there, but that guy's there. Like, okay, hard to kind of keep it straight in your mind, but it's just changed that dynamic. I also think one thing about it that I have absolutely loved is two things. I'll kind of talk about it from the fan and broadcaster perspective. We can talk about athletes differently now. I feel empowered to criticize a quarterback a lot more now than maybe I did 5 or 10 years ago, because that quarterback is making $30 million or whatever it is. That's a ridiculous number, but that guy's making money now. That guy's a professional, essentially, not professional, but essentially he is. So it's opened up so much more conversation about college sports because we can go where maybe we couldn't go before. Before it was, well, we're not going to be overly critical of this kid. He's 19. He's a college kid. He's just a kid. Now it's like, okay, he's making $4 million of these boosters' hard earned money to do X, Y, and Z. So that's changed it a little bit for better or for worse. On the good side, it's unlocked a different level of conversation and debate. On the other side, people feel entitled to speak about athletes in a different way, and that's not always a great thing, but there's pros and cons. I think the other way though is it's empowered athletes so much more, that we're seeing this trend, and we started seeing it in the professional level, that we saw athletes be empowered to really grow their voice a lot more. We see athletes have, like, active athletes have podcasts. Like Micah Parsons has a podcast, Draymond Green has a podcast, Taylor Lewan and Will Compton with Bussin' with the Boys have one of the most popular podcasts in all of sports podcasts. So that is really cool to see. It's that sense of empowerment and finding their own voice that maybe we didn't see in the past. And I do think that NIL deals have a lot to do with that, because now, we're talking about brands. Athletes have to have their own personal brands because they can monetize on those brands. They can pitch that brand to, potential brands that they might work with. I just saw that Arch Manning is working with Uber. Like, that's not something that Uber just called up Arch Manning one day and said, hey, would love to work with you. That's Arch Manning's personal brand that Uber wants to be part of. So we're seeing a lot more of a human side. We're seeing a lot more of we're just seeing like more personality and more depth in some of these athletes that we didn't see before. And that's because these guys are, potentially, taking care of their families based off of the money that they're making in college. So that's been a really interesting dynamic of it. And it changes the conversation. NIL and transfer portal and, the changes in the college football playoff, it's changing how we talk about the sport. It changes the dynamic. But I think the best thing about it is it doesn't change how we watch football. It doesn't change how we watch basketball. It doesn't change our love for the sport. Like, I still sit down and watch basketball games the exact same way now that I did 5 years ago. I still sit down and watch a college football game the exact same way, just like I did 5 years ago. It's just there's more parity in the sport because players can move. I live in Nashville. Vanderbilt's right down the street. Vanderbilt can beat Alabama because they can get guys like Diego Pavia and other pieces that they picked up in the transfer portal. So there's pros and cons, of course, to everything. But I have loved to see how NIL and making money and capitalizing on brands has really empowered young athletes.
And I've seen how like some athletes have started to choose to stay in college longer because,
Mhm.
and this, I feel like it kind of impacts how the line between professional and like amateur or collegiate athletes kind of like been blurred more and more because some of them are making more on these NIL deals than they would make in professional contracts now. And how do you feel that's like really like extended towards the fan bases? Because a lot of the NIL deals and marketing that they do is really about like, at least in my personal opinion, it's really about like their connection with the fan base at the schools, and then how they branch out from there internationally. So how would you say that like these NIL deals are like getting them to be closer and more have a more intimate relationship with
Mhm.
fans?
There's the good and the bad, obviously, with that too. The bad is a player can get up and leave a place that he or she has been for 3 or 4 years. And Carson Beck is a good example of that. Carson Beck was recruited to Georgia, waited his turn at Georgia, was the starting quarterback at Georgia for 2 years, and then left for Miami because he got a big time NIL deal. But also in that same breath, 5 years ago, before NIL, Carson Beck would have just gone to the NFL. So we get more Carson Beck in college. We get that interesting storyline of Carson Beck goes to Miami. Will he be successful at Miami? Will we see a Miami Georgia matchup in the college football playoff? Like, that's a really fun conversation. And I'm really excited to see what his career looks like at Miami. The good part of it is we as sports fans, I think we fall in love with people. Obviously, we love our teams. Like we love LSU, you love the Ravens. Like we love our teams and we love the sports, but we fall in love with personalities. NIL keeps those personalities around longer. The best example of that, I think, is men's and women's college football. In the men's game, like, Cooper Flag is the biggest star of the game at Duke. He'll be in the NBA next year. So it's just like a constant rotation of new faces, new places, new names. The women's game, we have Juju Watkins, who is one of the best stars in the sport. We have Flau'jae Johnson and Anissa Morrow and Michaela Williams at LSU. We get Paige Beckers. Paige Beckers has been at UConn for like 5 years, and she has cashed in a lot of money. Lauren Betts at UCLA, Hannah Hidalgo at Notre Dame. Those athletes are staying around longer because it is more lucrative to be a college athlete than it is to be a WNBA athlete. Now, that's an issue with the WNBA, and that's a different story for a different day. But I think that whenever you're able to retain players, whenever they stick around longer, you can fall in love with them a little bit more. There's a trickle up effect to that, to the professional leagues. I was talking with an NFL scout the other day, and he said, look, the fifth, sixth, and seventh rounds, they're just not the same anymore in the NFL draft because those players that maybe would have left college to go make money in the NFL that would have been drafted in the fifth, sixth, and seventh rounds, they're not leaving anymore because their thought process is I can stick around at LSU, I can make $500,000, and I can improve my draft stock and be a third, second, or first round pick the next year. So that impacts the draft, that impacts the amount of talent that comes out, but it also, in a way, makes the talent better because they're more refined and they stick around longer and they get more experience and they're more ready for the next level. So it has affected not just college sports, it's affected high school sports because now there's just not as many roster spots available for high school kids anymore. So I think we're starting to see more kids maybe go to JUCOs or go to smaller schools and then quote unquote work their way up into D1 into some Power Four schools. We're also seeing it affect the NFL, the WNBA, the NBA, Major League Baseball, so on and so forth. We're seeing that affect kind of the talent level on both sides.
Would you say that you feel that high school and like earlier levels before college are going to get more like televised attention, especially with the rise of NIL once it gets to college and the actual like different companies that may be scouting those younger athletes before they even get to the college, before they even get to the collegiate level, just so that they can maybe get them for easier deals before they, in a sense, blow up.
Yeah, and that also brings into play the legality of it all. Some states allow high school athletes to capitalize on NIL. I know California is one of those states. I think Missouri is another one. Some don't. So if there's a player out of California, then yeah, a Nike might hop on a high school sophomore because they can. Whereas I don't think in Louisiana you can capitalize on NIL as a high school student. So that's a totally different story as well of the legality and state by state rules and regulations for NIL. I do think it will, though, have a positive impact on televised events because now, before, when we were all had cable, you had the games on ESPN and ABC and CBS and Fox, and that was it. Those were your time frames. Those were the only options that you got. Now we have streaming services. So if you can televise on ESPN Plus or stream on ESPN Plus, volleyball and swimming and diving and sports that maybe weren't covered as heavily or really covered at all in the past. Netflix and Amazon Prime and Hulu, they're getting in on the live sports action. We just saw two NFL games on Christmas Day on Netflix. Netflix and Amazon Prime, they have a lot of money. There's a lot of cash in those streaming services. So will we start to see an LSU Alabama game on Netflix? I don't think that we're far off from that. So I think it's the current landscape of college sports, how much money is invested in college sports, and also kind of the changing media landscape as well, that we just consume media in a different way.
Now, there's one more subject I want to touch on.
Yeah, let's get it.
So, March Madness is starting. What are the narratives that you want to follow? Like, what are the things that are sticking out to you the most?
Ooh, there's so many narratives on really on the men's and women's side. I'll start with the women's because that's the area that I'm covering mostly. I get to be in Tampa for the Final Four. I'm super excited about that. The narratives that I'm following is exactly what I just mentioned. It's the stars. It's the how far can Juju Watkins carry USC? It's can LSU without Flage, at least through the SEC tournament, kind of bounce back and be able to, use that big three to their advantage. It's Georgia Amore at Kentucky. It's Paige Beckers and Easy Fudd at UConn. It's following those stars and seeing who else kind of emerges in the tournament as that next rising star, like we saw Juju kind of emerge last year. On the men's side, it's the SEC. And obviously, I'm biased. I do SEC radio. I graduated from an SEC program. I'm an SEC girly through and through. But the SEC is the deepest and the most competitive league that we have ever seen in men's college basketball. I wholeheartedly believe that. So, how far does the SEC go? We've seen some devastating losses from SEC teams in the past, like Kentucky losing to St. Peter's and Auburn losing to Yale, like inexplicable losses. Can the SEC finally break through and finally show in the postseason that they were deserving of all of the love and all of the praise they got in the regular season? Can we see an SEC team, not just in the Final Four, but in the national championship game and as an eventual national champion? Because it's about dang time the SEC gets represented in NCAA men's college basketball.
Seen a lot of really strong showings leading up to the playoffs, but at the end of the day, it's always about reaching that final chip and
Yep.
getting it.
Yeah, totally.
So, one last thing. Ahead of Selection Sunday, March 16th, are you seeing any like changes coming up with the seedings?
There could be. There very well could be. And I think at least I can speak from my perspective. I thought I had everything figured out. Auburn would be the number one overall seed, and then it would be Duke, Florida, and Tennessee after Tennessee knocked off Alabama. But then we saw Auburn lose to Texas A&M. I don't think that will change anything. I don't think that should change anything. But we could see some shakeup. We could see some changes. Alabama right now, in my opinion, and I believe Joe Lenardi bracketology has it the same way. Alabama got bumped down to a 2 seed after losing to Tennessee. Well, Alabama plays Florida, a top 5 team tonight, and then Alabama goes on the road to Auburn on Saturday. If Alabama wins both of those games, Alabama could knock off Florida or Tennessee and as a 1 seed. And I don't know what the specific numbers are, but it is an overwhelming advantage for a 1 seed to be the eventual national champion. I think only like 12% of the time has a non 1 seed eventually won a national championship, which is wild, absolutely wild. So that's going to be what I'm looking for is how things shake out in the rest of the regular season, especially in the SEC.
Was the majority of all my questions, but was there anything else you wanted to leave with the audience? Any messages?
Yeah, just good luck to everybody that's listening. I know everybody is probably has a lot of anxiety or a lot of trepidation about what the next step holds. You are going to be just fine. Have been prepared so well. Stay true to yourself. Stay true to what you want to do. I'm always here, always, always, always here for anybody that needs help or advice or for me to look at any of your work. If you just need a little bit of guidance or advice, I will try my very, very best to help you as much as I can. But you're going to be just fine and enjoy your last few, whether it's semesters or weeks or months or whatever it might be. Enjoy it because you don't get that moment again. If I could spend one more day as an LSU student, I would take it in a heartbeat. So enjoy every single second.
It's gonna take you up on that offer for like looking over some of my work later on.
Yeah,
For sure.
absolutely. Yes, yes, yes. Please do. Please do.
Well, we'll close up here, but love you guys. Hope you're all doing well. And thank you for your time, listening. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you. Thank you.